Whoa, hey, easy there.
Oh no, what's wrong?
He had been planning the escape before the wedding even happened. He had given her the ring, smiled through the engagement party, stood at the altar in a tailored suit while her mother wept with joy in the front row. And the entire time, every single day of it, he already knew he was going to take everything she had and walk straight out of her life. That was his plan. That had always been his plan. And it would have worked cleanly, completely, without a single person ever knowing the truth. If it had not been for one thing he never accounted for. One thing he could not charm, could not manipulate, and could not fool for even a single second. A dog. A quiet, dark-eyed, deeply serious dog who had been watching Marcus from the corner of the room since the very first evening. He walked through that door. The dog knew. From the very first night, the dog knew. And for 14 months Diana told herself that Brutus was just overprotective, that he just needed more time, that he would eventually come around. She was wrong. And on the night before her wedding, in a hotel hallway she was never supposed to be in, Diana finally understood what Brutus had been trying to tell her all along. What she heard through that door changed her permanently, and what she chose to do the next morning, standing at that altar in her wedding dress with a microphone in her hand and 300 people watching, is something that every single person in that room will carry with them for the rest of their lives. This is Diana's story, and I promise you, you are not ready for what she did. Before we get to what Diana heard, before we tell you what she did when she finally had the truth in her hands, we need to sit with 3 questions that will follow you through every minute of this story. The first question is the one that will make your chest tighten. How long had Marcus been lying? Not a moment of weakness. Not one lapse in an otherwise honest relationship. A deliberate, calculated, long-running deception that he had been maintaining with complete ease while Diana was planning her wedding and trusting him with her future. The second question is the one that will stay with you long after this video ends. What did Brutus know? Because there is something dogs understand about people that people do not always understand about each other. They cannot be performed for. They cannot be charmed or impressed or misled by a carefully constructed version of a person. They read something deeper than behavior, something that exists underneath the surface of how a person presents themselves. So when a dog refuses again and again and again to accept the man his owner is about to marry, what exactly is he reading? What was Brutus seeing in Marcus that Diana, who loved Marcus completely, could not yet bring herself to see? And the third question, the one that will make you want to stand up and cheer, is this. What did Diana do when she finally knew the truth? Because a woman discovering that the man she trusted has been living a lie is one kind of story. A woman deciding what to do about it, with the wedding the next morning and 300 guests already in the city, that is a completely different kind of story. That is the kind of story that reveals what a woman is made of. And what it revealed about Diana is something extraordinary. Before we go any further, drop your city or your state in the comments right now. We love knowing where our community is watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do that right now and hit that bell so you never miss our upcoming videos. Diana grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, the youngest of 3 daughters raised by a mother who worked as a hospital administrator and a father who ran a small accounting firm from an office 2 blocks from their house. They were a close family, Sunday dinners that ran long, a house that was always full of cousins and neighbors and people her mother had decided needed feeding. A father who coached Diana's softball team for 6 years, even though he knew nothing about softball when he started. She grew up knowing what it felt like to be loved without condition, and that knowing became the foundation of everything she believed about relationships. She believed people meant what they said. She believed that when someone showed you warmth, it was because warmth was what they had. She was not naive. She had lived enough of life by her 30s to know that people were complicated and love was not simple. But she had never lost the fundamental belief that the people who came into her life and stayed there had earned the right to be trusted. She built a life in Nashville after college, a career in nonprofit development that she was genuinely good at and genuinely cared about, a circle of friends that had held steady through job changes and moves and the ordinary turbulence of adult life, a 1-bedroom apartment that she had made into something warm and particular and entirely her own. She had a good life. A full life. She was not looking for someone to complete it. She was simply living it, open to whatever came next. When Marcus Webb walked into it, she met him at a charity gala her organization was co-hosting on a Friday evening in November. He was there representing a corporate sponsor, tall, composed, easy in a room full of strangers in the way that some people simply are. He found her during the cocktail hour and they talked for the better part of an hour before either of them thought to look for anyone else. He was funny and direct, and he listened in a way that felt rare, not waiting for his turn to speak, but actually absorbing what she said and responding to it. She gave him her number before the evening ended. He called the next morning. Not a text, a call. Diana told her best friend that weekend that he seemed like the real thing. She had been right about very few men. She was not right about this one. They dated for 10 months before she introduced him to Brutus. Brutus was a 3-year-old French bulldog, dark brindle coat, compact and serious, with the kind of steady and watchful presence that made people who did not know him slightly nervous and made people who did know him completely devoted to him. He had been Diana's dog since he was 8 weeks old, and he was, in the way of dogs who are loved well from the very beginning, deeply attuned to her. He knew her moods before she named them. He knew when she was upset before she showed it. He sat beside her during hard phone calls and moved to the door when she was about to receive good news before she had even opened the message. He was not a dramatic animal. He was simply a very honest one. The first time Marcus came to Diana's apartment and walked through the front door, Brutus came forward from the living room the way he approached everyone. Diana brought home, curious, calm, willing to make up his own mind. Marcus crouched down to greet him, and Brutus stopped. He planted his 4 feet on the floor, looked at Marcus with those flat dark eyes, and did not move closer. He did not growl. He did not bark. He simply looked at Marcus with an expression that Diana would later describe as assessment, stood there for a long moment, and then turned and walked back to his spot on the couch and lay down and watched. Marcus laughed it off. Diana laughed it off. She told herself Brutus was particular, that he took time with new people, that he would warm up. Brutus did not warm up. Not that evening. Not the next visit. Not over 10 months of Marcus coming and going through that front door. Week after week, Brutus maintained the same careful and deliberate distance from Marcus. He would not take food from his hand. He positioned himself between them when Marcus tried to kiss Diana goodbye at the door. He left the room when Marcus sat down on the couch. And on the specific occasions when Marcus raised his voice even slightly, not in anger, just in the animated way some people talk, Brutus would stand up from wherever he was, walk to Diana's side, and stand there, not threatening, just present, just making it clear, in the only language available to him, that he was watching and he was close and he was not going anywhere. Diana mentioned it to Marcus occasionally. Marcus's response was always the same, dismissive, with a slight edge underneath the dismissal that Diana registered and then chose not to examine. He said the dog was territorial. He said some dogs just had attitude problems. He said, more than once, that once they were married and living together the dog would have to learn his place. Diana noticed that he said the dog would have to learn, not that the dog would eventually adjust. She noticed and did not push it. She told herself it was a minor thing. That Marcus was not a dog person and that was fine. Not everyone was. She told herself that the tension between Marcus and Brutus was a small and manageable part of an otherwise good relationship. She bent her understanding of what she was seeing to protect something she wanted to keep. That is not a flaw unique to Diana. That is one of the most human things there is. Marcus Webb presented himself as a man who had built everything he had through honest work and discipline. He talked about his career in construction management the way people talk about things they are proud of, with specific detail, with the language of someone who has spent years developing expertise. He talked about his values the way Diana's father talked about his, straightforwardly, without performance, as if they were simply facts about himself rather than things he was trying to convince her of. He was generous on dates and thoughtful about small details and consistent in a way that felt, to Diana, like the most attractive quality a person could have. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered what she told him. He made her feel, in the particular way that a certain kind of man makes a certain kind of woman feel, that she was the most important thing in his world. What Marcus did not talk about was the woman he had been with for the 18 months before he met Diana. Her name was Renee. She lived in Memphis. She had believed, for the entirety of those 18 months, that she and Marcus were in a serious relationship moving toward a future. She had met his family. She had spent holidays with him. She had had the conversations that people have when they are building something together, about where they might live, about what they both wanted, about the shape of the life ahead of them. She had trusted him completely. And then, without a conversation, without an explanation, without anything that could be called an honest ending, Marcus had simply become unavailable. His calls had grown infrequent, then rare, then stopped. When Renee reached out, he was always busy, always about to call her back, always in the middle of something. The relationship did not end. It simply dissolved, slowly, on his side, while Renee spent months trying to understand what had happened and whether there was anything left to hold on to. By the time Marcus walked into that charity gala and found Diana during the cocktail hour, Renee had been waiting for a return phone call for 6 weeks. Marcus had not made that call. He had no intention of making it. He had moved on in the way that a certain kind of person moves on, not by closing doors but by simply walking away from them and letting them stand open behind him, unaddressed, as if the people on the other side of them were not real enough to require a proper goodbye. Diana did not know any of this. There was no reason she would have known. Marcus did not mention Renee. He did not mention that there was anyone. He presented himself as a man who had been single for the better part of 2 years, who was ready for something real, who had arrived at a place in his life where he knew what he wanted and was prepared to be honest about it. He was also, and this is the part that would take Diana the longest to fully absorb, quietly and methodically interested in her financial situation in ways that went beyond normal. He asked about her work in ways that seemed like engagement, but were actually inventory. He asked about her family's property in Atlanta, the house her parents owned, the small investment portfolio her father had built over decades, in ways that seemed like natural conversation and were actually something else. He positioned himself, over months of careful and patient work, as the kind of partner who was interested in building a shared future, who thought about long-term stability, who wanted to understand the full picture of the life they were creating together. Diana found this responsible. She found it mature. She found it exactly the kind of forward-thinking quality she had always hoped to find in a partner. She did not yet understand that what Marcus was actually doing was building a map. Brutus, through all of it, kept his eyes on Marcus every moment he was in that apartment. He never relaxed. He never adjusted. He sat in his spot on the couch, or at Diana's feet, or just inside the bedroom door, and he watched with those flat, dark, steady eyes, and he did not perform comfort. He did not feel, not for a single visit across 14 months. Diana told herself the dog just needed more time. Brutus had already made up his mind on night 1. He was simply waiting for Diana to catch up. Marcus proposed on a Sunday afternoon in April at a rooftop restaurant in downtown Nashville with a view of the city that Diana had mentioned wanting to see from up high the first time they drove past the building together 14 months before on their second date. He had remembered. He had made the reservation. He had arranged for her favorite flowers to be on the table when they arrived. He got down on one knee between the appetizers and the entrees in front of a restaurant full of strangers and said the things a man says when he wants a woman to believe he is completely certain. Diana said yes. She called her mother from the restroom before they had even ordered their main course, crying so hard she could barely speak. Her mother cried with her. Her father got on the phone and his voice broke when he said he was happy for her. It was, from every visible angle, exactly what a proposal should be. What Diana did not know, sitting across from Marcus at that rooftop table with her new ring on her finger and her family's voices in her ear, was that 2 weeks before that proposal Marcus had filed paperwork that listed him as a joint party on a savings account that Diana had opened in her own name 4 years earlier. The paperwork had been filed through a process that was technically legal, but that Diana had never been informed of, never discussed, and had never in any way agreed to. She did not know about the paperwork. She had no reason to look. She was planning a wedding. The 8 months of engagement that followed were the 8 months Diana had dreamed about since she was a little girl, watching her parents love each other across a Sunday dinner table. She visited venues and tasted cakes, and stood in fitting rooms while her mother and her sisters cried at how beautiful she looked. She made spreadsheets and color-coded timelines and sent vendor emails at 11 o'clock at night, because the planning made her happy, because every detail was a step closer to the life she was building. She was radiant in the way that people are radiant when they believe completely in what is ahead of them. Everyone who spent time with her during those months would say the same thing. Diana was the happiest they had ever seen her. That happiness, when you understand what was being built around it without her knowledge, is the most heartbreaking thing in this entire story. Brutus, through all of it, did not change. He did not soften toward Marcus as the months passed and the relationship deepened. He did not adjust. He watched from the corner of every room with the same steady, patient, unflinching attention he had given Marcus on night one. Diana had stopped mentioning it to Marcus, because the few times she had brought it up in recent months his response had carried an impatience that made her uncomfortable enough to drop the subject. She had started to feel, without quite being able to name it, that the topic of Brutus was a small area of tension she needed to manage carefully. That feeling, the feeling of needing to manage carefully around a person you love, the feeling of there being a subject that is not safe to raise, is its own kind of signal. Diana did not examine that signal either. She was planning a wedding. The wedding was on a Saturday in late October. The venue was a renovated estate outside Nashville. Tall white columns, oak trees draped in string lights, a ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a garden. Diana had chosen every detail with the particular focus of a woman who has been imagining this day since childhood and is finally watching it arrive. Brutus was staying with Diana's sister for the weekend. He had been dropped off that morning and had reportedly refused to eat his dinner, which Diana's sister mentioned in a text that Diana read and set down and did not think about for the rest of the day because she had 12 other things to think about, and the dog would be fine. The rehearsal dinner on Friday evening was everything Diana had hoped it would be. Her mother glowed. Her father made a toast that made the whole room laugh, and then go quiet, and then reach for whoever was sitting beside them. Marcus was charming and warm and said all the right things, and Diana, looking at him across that table, felt the particular contentment of a woman who believes she is chosen well. They said good night in the hotel lobby at 11, separate rooms, Diana's tradition, the last night before everything changed. Marcus kissed her and told her he would see her at the altar, and she walked to the elevator with her best friend and her heart completely full. Upstairs in her room, too wound up to sleep, Diana sat at the small desk near the window with a glass of water and her phone, and the particular restlessness of a woman on the night before her wedding when the adrenaline of the day has not yet released its hold. Her best friend, Keisha, had gone to her own room down the hall after making Diana promise to actually try to sleep. Diana was not going to actually try to sleep for at least another hour. She decided to find Marcus's groomsmen and get the gift bag she had put together for Marcus. A small collection of personal things she had assembled over the last month to give to him the morning of the wedding, which one of his groomsmen had offered to hold on to and deliver that night, so it would be waiting for him when he woke up. She called the groomsman. He said he was down the hall in room 414. She wrapped herself in the hotel robe, slipped her room key into the pocket, and walked down the corridor toward 414. She turned a corner and stopped. Marcus was standing in the hallway outside a room 3 doors from his groomsmen's. He was not alone. There was a woman with him, a woman Diana had never seen before, standing close enough that the space between them was unmistakable, talking in the low and easy tone of two people who are deeply familiar with each other. Diana stood at the corner of the hallway in her hotel robe with a room key in her pocket and watched the man she was marrying tomorrow touch another woman's face with the easy familiarity of someone who had been doing it for a long time. Her first instinct was to step back around the corner before he saw her. And she did. She pressed her back against the wall and stood there in the silence of the corridor and breathed. Her hands were shaking. Her legs felt like something had been removed from them. She could still hear their voices, low and intimate, punctuated by quiet laughter. And then she heard Marcus say a name. The name was Renee. Diana stood against that wall for a long time after they had gone back inside the room. She did not cry. She would say later that the crying did not come until much later, that in that corridor the only thing she felt was a cold, clarifying, total understanding. Not shock exactly. She would say later that it was not exactly shock. That somewhere underneath everything she had been telling herself for 14 months, underneath the engagement, and the ring, and the rooftop restaurant, and the fitting rooms, and her mother's tears of joy, There had been a quiet and persistent something that she had been working very hard not to hear. A signal she had been explaining away. And standing in that corridor at 11:30 on the night before her wedding, that something finally had a name. She walked back to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. And she thought about Brutus. She thought about every single time Brutus had placed himself between her and Marcus at the door. Every time he had left the room when Marcus sat down. Every time he had stood up and walked to her side when Marcus's voice rose. Every time she had looked at her dog looking at Marcus with those flat, steady, knowing eyes and told herself that the dog just needed more time to adjust. Brutus had never needed more time. Brutus had known from night one. Brutus had been telling her the truth every single day for 14 months, and Diana had looked at that truth and chosen, again and again, to call it something else. She picked up her phone. She did not call Marcus. She did not call Keisha. She sat in the quiet of that hotel room, and she thought for a very long time. She thought about what it would mean to cancel. She thought about her mother asleep 2 floors above her in this same building, who had flown in from Atlanta, and whose happiness tonight was so complete and so visible that it had moved Diana to tears twice at the rehearsal dinner. She thought about 300 people who had traveled from 5 states and taken days off work and bought new dresses and driven through the night. She thought about the estate with the oak trees and the floor-to-ceiling windows and every vendor she had paid and every detail she had planned and the 6-tiered cake that was being delivered at 8 in the morning. And then she stopped thinking about all of that and asked herself one single question. One clear, direct, non-negotiable question. What kind of woman do you want to be? She had her answer before the question was fully formed. By 2 in the morning, Diana had made her decision. Not in anger. Not in the hot and consuming chaos of fresh hurt. In the particular cold clarity that arrives when a person has cried what needed to be cried and sat with what needed to be sat with and come out on the other side of it into something solid and certain and entirely their own. She was not going to cancel. She was not going to send anyone home. She was not going to protect Marcus from the consequences of what he had chosen to do. She was going to walk down that aisle. She was going to stand at that altar. And then, in front of every person who loved her and every person who loved him and everyone who had traveled from anywhere to be in that room, she was going to tell the truth. She picked up her phone. She opened her notes app. And she began to write. She was up at 6. Her bridesmaids arrived at 7 and found her dressed and calm and drinking coffee at the small table by the window, which was not what any of them expected, but which told Keisha, who had known Diana since they were both 19 years old, everything she needed to know. Keisha closed the hotel room door behind the other girls and looked at Diana and said, "What happened?" Diana told her. Keisha sat down. She did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" Diana told her that too. Keisha nodded once and said, "Then that is what we are doing." She never once tried to talk Diana out of it. That was why Diana had kept Keisha as her best friend for 14 years. Hair and makeup took 3 hours. Diana sat in the chair and let them work and answered questions and laughed at the right moments and was, by every visible measure of the 5 women in that room, a completely composed and radiantly happy bride on the morning of her wedding. Only Keisha knew what was underneath the composure. Only Keisha saw the thing in Diana's eyes that was not happiness, but was something more durable than happiness. The look of a woman who has made a decision she fully means and is simply waiting for the moment to act on it. Across the hotel, Marcus was getting ready in his room with his groomsmen. He was relaxed. He was joking. He had no idea that the woman he was about to marry had been standing in a corridor the previous night, watching him tuck a piece of hair behind another woman's ear. He had no idea that Diana had spent the hours between midnight and 6 writing and rewriting what she was going to say. He had no idea that anything had changed. As far as Marcus knew, this was simply his wedding morning. He was the only person involved in this wedding who believed it was still going to happen the way it had been planned. They arrived at the estate at 10. The oak trees with their string lights were perfect in the October morning light. The ballroom with its floor-to-ceiling windows was full of flowers and candles and the warm, unhurried murmur of 300 people who were happy to be somewhere together. Marcus stood at the altar looking like everything he had presented himself to be, composed, handsome, completely at ease. His family filled the right side of the room. Diana's family filled the left. Her mother was in the front row in a cream dress, already holding a handkerchief even though the ceremony had not started. Her father was beside her, sitting very straight, the way fathers sit when they are doing their best to hold themselves together until they do not have to anymore. The music shifted. The string quartet moved into the processional. Diana's bridesmaids came down the aisle first, and then the room rose. Every person in that ballroom stood and turned toward the entrance. And Diana walked in. She wore a dress that had taken 5 fittings to get exactly right. Off-shoulder, fitted, a train that moved behind her like something from a film. In that light, in that space, she was extraordinary. She walked slowly and deliberately, making eye contact with her mother, with her father, with her college friends in the 4th row, with the cousins who had driven overnight to be there. She looked like a woman completely certain of where she was going. She reached the altar and turned to face Marcus. He smiled at her, that warm, open, practiced smile that had convinced her, over 14 months, that she knew who he was. She did not smile back. She held his eyes with a steadiness that made something shift in his expression, a small, almost imperceptible flicker of uncertainty crossing his face and gone before he could name it. The officiant welcomed the room. He spoke about love and commitment and the meaning of the moment. And then he paused, as he would at any ceremony, and asked if anyone had any reason why these 2 people should not be joined in marriage. Diana raised her hand, not dramatically, with complete and quiet certainty. The way a woman raises her hand when she has something to say and is no longer afraid of what saying it will cost her. The officiant stopped. Every person in that ballroom went still. Marcus's expression moved from confusion to something closer to alarm in the space of about 2 seconds. Diana looked at the officiant and said, calmly and clearly, "I have something I need to say. I need everyone in this room to hear it. I am sorry for what I am about to do to this morning, but I am not sorry for telling the truth." The silence in that ballroom was total. 300 people who had been breathing and shifting and thinking about the reception dinner were now all doing the same thing, staring at the bride, completely motionless. Not one of them certain what was about to happen, but every one of them understanding that something was. Diana turned to face the room. All of it, all 300 people, her mother's face in the front row and her father's hand reaching for her mother's hand and Marcus standing 2 feet away from her, and the October light coming through those floor-to-ceiling windows onto all of them. She took a breath, and she spoke. She said, "I have spent 14 months planning this day. I have loved planning it. I have loved what I believed this day meant, and what I believed the man standing beside me was. Last night, I walked down the hallway of this hotel, and I saw Marcus with a woman named Renee in a way that left nothing open to interpretation." A pause. The room made the sound rooms make when 300 people receive information that changes the meaning of everything they believe they were present for. She continued without stopping. "What I saw last night was not new. I understand now that it was not new. And I know that what I am about to tell you is going to be hard for some of you to hear, because some of you love Marcus, and some of you have traveled a long way to be in this room, and I am deeply sorry for what this morning is instead of what it was supposed to be." She paused again. "Then, I have a dog. Some of you have met him. His name is Brutus. And from the very first night Marcus walked into my home, Brutus would not accept him, would not warm up to him, would not relax around him, would not stop watching him. I spent 14 months telling myself that my dog just needed more time." She stopped. She looked at Marcus directly. He had not moved. He had not said a word. There was nothing on his face that looked like the face of an innocent man. She said, "My dog knew on night 1. He has known every single day since. I should have listened to my dog." The room was completely silent for a moment. And then something happened that nobody had anticipated and nobody planned. Diana's mother, a composed and private woman who had not made a scene in public in her entire adult life, stood up from her seat in the front row. She stood up and began to clap. Slowly at first. Then Keisha stood up from her seat in the 3rd row and began to clap. Then one of Diana's cousins. Then another. Then 2 of her college friends. The applause spread through Diana's side of the room the way a wave moves. Not wild, not chaotic, but steady and building and entirely real. Some people were crying. Some people were shaking their heads in slow, deliberate affirmation. One woman in the 7th row who had never met Diana in her life was on her feet with her hand pressed to her heart. Marcus stood at the altar and watched it happen. He did not speak. He did not defend himself. He looked at the room, and he looked at Diana, and he looked at the door, and he made the only decision that was available to him. He turned and walked out through the side exit with two of his groomsmen moving quickly to follow. The door closed behind him. Diana stood at the altar in her wedding dress and watched him go. Then she turned back to the room, to the 300 people standing and sitting and crying and looking at her, and she said, in a voice that was completely steady, "We are not having a wedding today. But we are not going home either. The flowers are beautiful. The food is paid for. And the people in this room are the people I love most in this world. So we are going to celebrate something else today. We are going to celebrate the fact that the truth arrived before it was too late." She set the microphone down on the edge of the altar. She picked up her bouquet. Her mother came up the aisle to her and took her hand and held it. Keisha was right behind her. And Diana, in her wedding dress, with her mother beside her and her best friend at her back, and 300 people bearing witness, walked through the ballroom toward the garden with her head level and her eyes clear and something on her face that was not happiness exactly, but was stronger than happiness. It was the look of a woman who has told the truth in a room that needed to hear it and has not one single regret about doing so. The reception, if you could call it that, lasted 4 hours. Not a wedding reception. Something different. Something that did not have a name before that day, but that everyone who attended would spend years trying to describe accurately. People took off their jackets. Shoes came off. The DJ, to his enormous credit, read the room and played exactly the right things. Diana's father danced with her to a song she had chosen for the father-daughter dance, and he cried the entire time, and she held him through it. The food was served, and it was wonderful, and people ate and talked with the particular intensity of people who have been through something together and need to process it in the company of others. Several people who had come as Marcus's guests and had no existing relationship with Diana came to find her over the course of the afternoon to say things that she would remember for a long time. An older woman, Marcus's aunt, a woman Diana had met twice, came and held Diana's hands for a moment and said only, "You are better off, sweetheart. And I am ashamed it took this for me to say so." The story reached the internet within 24 hours. A guest posted about it anonymously, carefully, with enough detail to convey what had happened and not enough to expose anyone by name. It spread the way these stories spread when they land on something real, shared and reshared across every platform, picked up by accounts with large audiences, translated into summaries and headlines and comment section arguments that ran for days. The response from women was immediate and overwhelming and almost entirely in one direction. They recognized something in Diana's story. Not just the betrayal. Betrayal stories were everywhere. They recognized the dog. They recognized the signal that had been there from the beginning and had been explained away for 14 months. They recognized the particular quality of Diana's decision, not the decision to expose Marcus, but the decision, made alone in a hotel room at 2 in the morning, to stop protecting someone who had not protected her. That decision resonated in a way that the internet, for once, did not manage to make smaller than it was. Marcus did not release a statement for 11 days. When he did, it was brief and said very little. It expressed regret for any pain caused and asked for privacy. It did not address Renee. It did not address the financial paperwork. It did not address Diana's dog. Diana's attorney, who she retained within the week, had by that point already begun the process of examining what Marcus had filed without her knowledge in the months before the wedding. The joint account paperwork. The records request on her parents' property that had been made through a third party in a way that was not immediately visible. The pattern of financial interest that, when laid out in sequence by someone who knew what they were looking at, told a story that was considerably colder and more deliberate than even Diana had understood on the night she made her decision in that hotel room. She had walked away from that altar with more than her dignity. She had walked away from it before Marcus had the legal standing to access a single thing he had been mapping. Her attorney was direct about what would have followed if the wedding had taken place. It would have been complicated and expensive and damaging in ways that went far beyond the end of a marriage. Diana had stopped it before it started. Her dog had been trying to help her stop it for 14 months. She had finally listened. Section 9. Brutus Stopwatch 48:00, 52:00. Diana went to pick up Brutus from her sister's house the Monday after the wedding. Her sister opened the door and Brutus came through it at a speed that surprised both of them, pressing himself against Diana's legs and staying there, trembling slightly the way dogs tremble when they have been worried and have stopped being worried, and the relief is physical. Diana sat down on her sister's front step in her regular clothes. Not the wedding dress, not any version of the previous weekend's Diana, just herself, and let her dog climb into her lap in a way he had not done since he was a puppy, and held him, and did not say anything for a long time. Her sister sat beside her, and did not say anything either. After a while, Brutus settled. His breathing slowed. He laid his head on Diana's knee and looked out at the street with those flat, steady, knowing eyes. Not watchful anymore. Just present. Just there. Just done. Diana looked at him for a long time. And then she said, out loud, to her dog and to no one else, I know. I know you were trying to tell me. I am sorry it took me so long. Brutus did not move. His tail shifted once, slowly, the way a dog's tail moves when someone has finally said exactly the right thing. Diana scratched his ears. She sat on that front step with her dog in her lap, and the October sun on both of them, and she breathed. She would say later, when she eventually talked about what had happened, that moment on her sister's front step was the moment she understood what the whole experience had actually been about. Not Marcus. Not the wedding. Not the ballroom, or the recording, or the 300 people, or the internet. The moment that mattered was sitting on a front step with her dog, finally listening to something she should have listened to from the very beginning, and feeling, underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the enormous complicated weight of everything the previous weeks had held, something that was unmistakably, solidly, quietly like relief. There is something this story is asking that goes deeper than the betrayal, deeper than the altar moment, deeper than any of the dramatic details that made it spread across the internet the way it did. It is asking a question about listening, about the specific and costly human habit of finding explanations for the signals that are trying to protect us. Diana had a dog who knew the truth from night one. He showed her, in the only language available to him, every single day for 14 months. He was never subtle. He never stopped. He placed his body between them at the door and sat at her feet when Marcus's voice rose and watched with those flat dark eyes from the corner of every room, and he did not once, in 14 months, pretend to feel ease he did not have. And Diana, who loved that dog completely, who trusted that dog with the texture of her daily life, looked at all of it and found the explanation that cost her less. She called it stubbornness. She called it adjustment. She told herself he just needed more time. She bent her understanding of what she was seeing to protect a story she wanted to keep. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is not naivety. That is love doing what love does to judgment, narrowing it, softening it, finding the reading of every situation that allows the love to continue. The grief Diana carried after that weekend was real, and it was not small. She had not lost a villain. She had lost the version of Marcus she had believed in, which was a real version to her, a version built out of 14 months of genuine feeling and genuine investment and genuine hope. The loss of that version was a real loss, even though the man himself had not been real in the way she needed him to be. Grief does not require that the thing you lost was worthy of you. It only requires that you loved it. Diana grieved. She let herself grieve without performing recovery for anyone. She took time off work. She spent weekends with her family in Atlanta. She went to therapy. She was honest in every session about the things she found hardest to make peace with, not Marcus's betrayal, but the 14 months of choosing not to see what was right in front of her. Her therapist said something to her in one of those sessions that she would carry for a long time. She said, "You did not fail to see it. You chose to protect yourself from what seeing it would cost you. That is not the same thing. And the moment you were finally ready to pay the cost, you paid it. Fully. In front of 300 people. That took everything you had." 6 months after the wedding, Diana was asked in an interview, the one interview she agreed to give, carefully, on her own terms, whether she regretted anything about how the day had gone. She thought about it for a moment. Then she said, "I regret the 14 months. Not the morning. The morning I got exactly right. The 14 months I wish I had spent listening to my dog." Diana went back to work. She went back to her apartment, which she had always loved and which felt, after a few weeks, like her own again in the way it had been before Marcus had been part of it. She bought Brutus a new bed, a big, comfortable, well-made one, and put it in the corner of the living room where he had always slept. The first night she put it there, Brutus climbed in without ceremony, turned once, lay down, and closed his eyes. Diana sat across the room and looked at her dog sleeping and felt something settle in her that she did not have a name for yet, but that felt, underneath everything, like the beginning of something true. She started paying attention differently. Not anxiously. Not in the hyper-vigilant way of someone who has been hurt and is now scanning for threats. But with the calm, open attentiveness of a woman who has learned the cost of not listening and has decided that the cost is too high. She pays attention to what feels off, and she does not explain it away anymore. She trusts the instincts she spent 14 months overriding. She trusts her dog. She walks through her life with the particular quiet confidence of a woman who knows what she is made of because she has been tested and she has passed, and she has not forgotten what it felt like to finally tell the truth in a room that needed to hear it. She is not bitter. She does not talk about Marcus with anger. She talks about him, when she talks about him at all, the way you talk about a chapter of your life that taught you something you needed to know and that you are genuinely glad is over. She is grateful for what she cannot yet fully name. The strange and unlikely gift of a betrayal that arrived before it was too late, announced by a dog who had known from night one and waited 14 months for her to catch up. Brutus is doing well. We want to hear from you. Not just about Diana and Marcus, but about the real question this story is asking. Have you ever had a signal, an instinct, a feeling you could not name, trying to tell you the truth about someone you loved, and you found a reason not to listen? Have you ever looked back and understood that the signs were there from the very beginning and you explained every single one of them away? Tell us in the comments. We read every one, and those conversations matter deeply to us. Drop your city or your state while you are there. We genuinely love knowing where our community is watching from. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the thing at the center of it, the courage it takes to finally listen to the truth when it has been there all along, is something every woman watching this has navigated in some form and in some chapter of her life. And there is real power in knowing you are not alone in that. More stories are coming to this channel. Stories that go deeper, that stay longer, that speak to what women know and what women carry and what women do when the truth finally arrives. Subscribe if you have not. Hit that bell. Come back. Bring someone you love with you. Brutus is sleeping. Diana is okay. More than okay. And somewhere out there right now, there is a dog sitting at the feet of a woman who loves him, watching something she is not yet ready to see, waiting with the patience and the loyalty and the absolute honesty that only animals have. He will keep watching. He will keep waiting. He has always known the truth. The only question is when she will be ready to hear it. Thank you for watching.